This Book, a podcast where we, Nicole and Eden, read a banned or challenged book twice a month and discuss its meaning, impact, and censorship to make it more accessible for all readers. This week's book is Song of Solomon by Toni Morrison, which was published in 1977.
Yay! That's also the year my parents graduated high school.
No way.
Yeah, 77 goes to heaven. That's just
that
a little.
Was their like high school senior.
Yeah, and I can't tell you what mine was.
2010.
All right then.
Begin again.
We had such a cool time.
Yeah. This is the last book of the season.
Oh, and what a book it is.
What a book it is.
Yes, this is an incredible book. I think a little preface is I think this is my favorite Toni Morrison book, and I think it's in my top 5 favorite books of all time.
Oh, wow.
I know.
This was a pretty fantastic book. Like when I was in my reading slump, the last 2 books were kind of a slog, but this one, I was also reading this at the same time, and this was the only one I could really like manage.
Yeah. I want to dig into that, and I want to understand why. Going through the reading slog, which we've all done, where it's just painful to read anything because it's so boring no matter what it is. I want to know how this one pulled you out. Like, I want to know what parts of it were good. Okay, so a quick summary. This is Toni Morrison's 3rd novel that was published. And so it follows the story of a man named Milkman, a nickname given to him for crass purposes that is very like dehumanizing. And it just kind of follows his journey of self-actualization. And there's a heavy genealogy point. He travels to the place where his father and aunt grew up, and where their father was murdered by white people in their town. And it just I'm doing such a bad job. I had it all written out, but yeah, it follows the story of Milkman venturing from his home to the place of his family's origin, trying to better understand himself, his identity as a Black man, and what he is supposed to expect out of life and who he's supposed to be. There are themes of suicide, rape, masculinity, insanity, so mental health, and also the class issues within the Black community, and also the racial structure of America. So that is the book. Another thing I want to just bring up before we get into it is the first time I read this book was like 3 or 4 years ago, and I listened to it. And I was living alone in an apartment, and I was listening to it, and there was like this day that was really rainy, and I was like, this is the perfect day. Listen to Toni Morrison reading Song of Solomon. I posted on Instagram that I spent the day listening to Song of Solomon, read by Toni Morrison, and everyone was like, oh, I didn't know she read parts of the Bible. And people messaged me like, can you send me a link? I'm so interested. And I sent them a link of the novel, and no one responded.
Yeah.
So, which leads into the fact that this book is like all biblical names. We have Ruth, we have Corinthians, Pilate, Hagar. It is like, and the biblical names are so interesting because she doesn't choose the obvious heroes of the Bible. Pilate is a really big spiritual source in this book. And she's named after the king who sent Christ to his crucifixion. Yeah. Not the king, the Roman leader. Jurisdiction of his whatever prowess. Yeah. So very interesting.
Yeah. I think, well, yeah, and Milkman's given name is Macon Dead the Third. And so he's the 3rd Macon, and the last name is Dead within this whole family. So that is interesting in itself too, of just all the like symbolism upon symbolism upon symbolism.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why, because like as you were giving the summary, I was thinking about the other two books, and the House of the Spirits has similar themes.
Mm-hmm.
And so why is it that this was what pulled me out? And not to be mean, but
It's
maybe Toni
fine.
Morrison is a better right. Well,
Whoa.
granted, like
Yeah.
Isabel Allende's book was a translation,
Yeah. And that's always kind of tough.
and that's always kind of tough.
Yeah.
So like to read this novel, yeah, Toni Morrison's prose is just like unmatched. I
Mm-hmm.
think,
Yeah.
um, in my opinion, I've not read anything like her prose, and probably never will again, unless there's like Toni Morrison herself.
Yeah.
Um, and so part of me thinks it's like just her writing is what pulled me in, and
Oh,
like
I
the
love that.
magic of her writing, and I think it's like such a beautiful ability to draw people in where on like the surface level it doesn't seem like it would be a story that would resonate with me as
Mm-hmm.
like second generation Chinese American, you know. Um but just like a lot of really beautiful stories of family history and being rooted in that.
Mm-hmm.
Because without that, you kind of are living a floaty life,
Mm-hmm.
um, not grounded in anything, not grounded in any family stories. Like this also gave me like Giver vibes, where
Yeah.
without knowing where you came from, you can't really live a meaningful life. Um, and you see that with like Macon, he's kind of like feeding off of other people. First, I thought it was just like a crass nickname, which listeners, it comes from because when he was 4 years old, someone saw him nursing and then called him Milkman. I'm like, I guess 4 years old is old, but also,
Also, it's so dependent um on different like social expectations,
yeah,
because there are societies where that is not
that is, yeah,
totally bonkers, and it comes from this like gossip guy
yeah,
who who is an unreliable narrator as well,
mm-hmm.
who spreads this rumor about this young child and his mother having an inappropriate relationship because he was breastfeeding so
Yeah,
late. uh, and that's like there's so many unreliable narrators in this book.
yeah,
Yeah, and a lot of it is Milkman trying to figure out what his true story is.
mm-hmm. Um, and I know that was a tangent from what I was originally talking about, and I totally forgot what I was talking about.
No, you're going into Milkman finding his heritage. He's floating around,
Oh yeah, he's floating
and
around
the
and kind
name
of like,
Milkman, what the name means.
like taking from others. If we were to like pass judgment on a 4-year-old nursing that relatively later time,
Yeah, pass judgment on a 4-year-old,
yeah,
which is something we love to do.
yes, um, but yeah, like him feeding off of his mother in that way, and then continue to feed off of like the people in his community, um,
Yeah,
and like his dad was a slumlord, I believe.
yeah, 100%.
Um, yeah, and so I wonder if like the last name Dead kind of because of like the lack of connection, that's they grow up kind of dead inside,
Yeah, it could be.
emotionally dead, and just like, you know what, this is what we do. We just like feed
Yeah,
off of other people, and we
yeah.
don't
They're kind of
contribute to community.
parasitical on the
Yeah,
community. And we even see that, like, let's break down all of Milkman's relationships.
yeah,
So the biggest one is with this woman named Hagar, who's his cousin.
mm-hmm.
She's older than him. I think she's like 10 years older.
Yes,
And it starts off with her being this like very like sexy older woman who's cool, and he's a teenager, and They start hooking up, and they know that nothing's really going to happen. But she starts getting more and more attached, and he just continues using her
Mm-hmm.
for the physical relationship. And as he starts to treat her like she is disposable, she becomes obsessed with him. And she starts to kind of like the first time I read it, I was like, oh, she's the worst. This time I read it and I was like, oh, I identify with her 100%. I've dated
Mm.
people who've treated me disposably, like after years of dating them, and then they just like threw me aside.
Yeah.
Um, and the anger and the lack of trust, and you start doubting yourself because you're like, did I make that whole thing up? Like, it's a very real and terrifying feeling to go through,
Yeah.
to feel like someone you trusted and loved you just threw you away.
Mm-hmm.
And it's scary because you start feeling these big things that you've never really felt, mixed with hatred and love and obsession,
Yeah.
because you don't know if you're trying to be vindicated. And Hagar goes through all of that. And like every month she tries to murder Milkman.
Mm-hmm.
And Hagar's mom, Pilot, knows about it and is mad at her daughter. She's like, you can't kill your family. Um, Milkman's mother is also mad about it, but also it's complicated because Milkman is just has been blatantly using
Mm-hmm.
Hagar. Even her trying to murder him gives him some sort of validation, and
Yeah.
also gives him a strange amount of purpose every month.
Yeah.
Like his, like there's some meaning to his life, even though he's just floating along, being the
Mm-hmm.
wealthy son of a slumlord. Um, and Hagar, so we've got Hagar, who he's using. His father, who he's using because he works for his dad, he has no real feelings about it. Like he
Mm-hmm.
doesn't, he goes through these crises halfway through about like, who is my dad? Is he a good person? Is he bad? Do I hate
Mm-hmm.
him? Yada yada. His mother, who he's like, she's just a person who serves me, kind of thing. His
Yeah.
sisters, also just women that serve him. And they end up standing up to him later on and they're mad at him, but like he treats them flippantly.
Mm-hmm.
His best friend, what was his name? I can't remember.
Guitar.
Guitar. That, oh my
Also a
gosh.
great name.
Great name, great character.
Mm-hmm.
So cool, so interesting. Um, yeah, Guitar. He just treats, like he just wants him for validation. And when Guitar gives him the hard truths of life, Milkman gets mad. Um, can you think of anyone else that he uses?
um, I think you covered the
Yeah.
bases.
Even Pilot, he tries to go and steal
Oh
her
yeah.
possessions,
Mm-hmm.
which is
Him.
wacky, even though she showed him so much love and respect
Yeah.
from the early days.
Yeah. So unlikable character from the get-go.
But it makes sense. I mean, he's the youngest in this family. He's the only boy in the family. He's got a lot of promise.
Yeah.
You know,
Very privileged.
do you have family members where it's like we have this great uncle, my grandma's younger brother. He was the youngest and he was also the only boy, and he was treated totally differently than the rest of the girls and the family.
Hmm.
And he ended up like being part of the mafia in bizarre ways. But he was just very
Fun.
entitled and he
Yeah.
lived his life that way. Um, yeah, like very much a prince amongst men because he was the only boy in the family.
Yeah. Just like the perpetuating toxic masculinity in men.
100%, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I always talk about how, and I say this with love, Dad, if you're listening.
And I'm just gonna give a disclaimer: Enid's parents, 10 out of 10 folks.
Yeah.
But yes, go on.
But he had 3 girls. And so yeah, it was interesting. He made a comment once where he was encouraging my younger sister who is single to pursue a master's degree. And I was on the call too, so I was like, "Oh, why aren't you encouraging me to do that?" And he said, "Well, it's because you're probably eventually going to quit your job and stay home." I'm like, "Oh." what in my life and in our phone
Yeah.
calls has indicated that I will be quitting my job and staying home, if I'm already have not done that.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, and so that moment, I just like reflected a ton on like my upbringing and realizing if I did have a brother, would I even have a relationship with my dad?
Mm,
Um,
that is such an interesting question.
yeah, because like we did all like the quote unquote boy chores because you didn't have boys to give
Yeah.
those chores to. So I
Man's work.
man's work. So I mowed the lawn, um, shoveled the driveway, but I could totally see my dad if we had a brother to be like, hey, like this is what boys do. Like this, like
Mm-hmm.
the women stay inside and they like leave a comfy life and cook for us and stuff like that. And like my dad doesn't cook. My mom, maybe I shouldn't tell where her hiding spot for her chocolates are, but she has a hiding spot for chocolates
Yeah.
somewhere cooking related because she knows my dad won't find it there.
Yeah.
Um,
My mom has a hiding spot for goodies as well.
yeah,
Yeah, and it's very obvious. Yeah.
yeah.
But yeah.
Um, and like he was the firstborn son and
Yeah.
very much like really well firstborn son in a society that values well that has preference for one child and
Yeah.
has a history of like
Historically, very
historically murdered
yeah.
girls or shipped them off or abandoned them
Yeah.
so that they could just keep their sons. And like the I don't know, it's really interesting. Like the patriarchal use of names.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm in a weird spot where like legally I go by my husband's name, but I've kept my name socially and at work too.
Yeah.
I've like asked for special
Yeah. Yeah.
special privileges at work to keep my maiden name.
Yeah.
Um and like it's confusing to me of like shoot, like should I have like just kept my maiden name and not cause this confusion, but then like how do well, I don't know, I don't know. It's just like a lot of naming stuff, but
Yeah.
and like
And
the reason why a lot of girls were killed or abandoned in China were because they wanted the boy to carry the family name.
yeah.
Um and like yeah, what's in a name? And like the pride of like keeping a family name alive. But then I'm just monologuing here. But
No, but
like
that leads directly to why his name is Macon Dead
yeah.
and how that name wasn't even the birth name of his grandfather.
Uh-huh.
It was a name given to him when he was freed from
Mhm.
slavery because he was explaining to the clerk where he was from, Macon,
Uh-huh.
and that his family was dead or something.
Yeah.
And he just wrote them down, these words randomly down in the lines, and he lost his name.
Mhm.
Yet
Making
the
dead.
family chose to carry it on,
Mhm.
which is very fascinating to me.
Super fascinating. Yeah, yeah, I feel like conflicted as we're talking about this because like the importance we put on a family name
Mm-hmm.
that causes like the death of many girls.
Yeah.
Um, but then like the importance of family history
Yeah.
is just like a really interesting dichotomy and push and pull and
Absolutely. And I think the more that we talk about it,
mm-hmm.
the more complicated it is. And it's kind of like the reproductive rights conversations in that somehow the burden is placed only on women.
Yeah.
And also, we like, I don't know a lot of, like, I think there are a few men, but I personally don't know a lot of men who have wrestled with this question. they kind of excuse themselves out of the conversation because they're like, it's not my right or whatever, but it literally is half the conversation.
Yeah.
You know? And I'd love to hear what they would say about taking on their spouse's name, or how they would feel if they really like sat down and thought about it the way that you are.
Mm-hmm.
Because I hear a lot of flippant like, oh yeah, totally, we'll do what's best. But if they really sat down and thought about their family line,
Mm-hmm.
what it means to have that last name with their family, and how that the legacy that is placed upon them through that
Mm-hmm.
last name, and then having it taken away, um, is a very interesting conversation. I'd love to hear people in earnest talking about that, specifically men.
Yeah.
Yeah, because women, I hear it a lot from women. Like my older sister struggled with this idea. What should she do?
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, I don't know. I
Yeah,
don't know.
because yeah,
Yeah, and this
I
is
like how the
yeah. Go ahead.
Latina culture does it, where
Me
they
too.
typically just like append. They both take the
They
children
honor
take
both
both names.
sides. Yeah,
Yeah, and like how beautiful that is to honor both sides.
yeah,
It's not like you're just taking on
yeah.
the dad side. Yeah.
And there's such a level of ownership also. Like taking upon the husband's name is so rooted in like feudal society of like, they now own
Land.
you. They're
Yep.
now responsible for you
Uh-huh.
legally, and you are now in servitude essentially,
Mm-hmm.
um, to that name. Um, and yeah, and like, I think that was one of the biggest pieces of this story, of this book. What is in a name? Because that was what Macon Dead was trying to figure out, who his great grandfather and his grandfather actually was.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and there's this part that I thought was really beautiful. I'm going to start crying thinking about it. There's like a lot of parts of this book that make me tear up. But his Aunt Pilot, she had around her neck written out her name. And it was what her father had written out. That like he found her name in the Bible, didn't know the story, but just found it in the Bible. Slash, he had someone tell him because he couldn't read, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he wrote it out and made sure that she had that specific name, and that's all she had from her father. And he was murdered by white townsmen. He was sitting on his fence trying to protect his land, and they killed him for his land. And then the children had to escape and run, getting unmoored from their place of origin, their
Mm-hmm.
family. Their names were already taken away because his dad was given the name Macon Dead, but he
Mm-hmm.
chose to keep it, which is so fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
And this started this like long exodus away from their homeland, and then they had to gather back to it at the end. But her name was written around her neck, and that was like her most prized possession, which I think is so beautiful to me.
Super beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's like, it was like almost like a talisman. There was some sort of power evoked through that little necklace that she wore
Mm-hmm.
everywhere she went. So interesting. Oh, oh. Um, I'm just going to tell you my other part that made me cry.
Yeah.
So, Milkman, protagonist, we get it. We're following his story. It's very Odysseus kind of. He meets strange characters as he's going home and then returning back. There's all these things. All while he's doing that, in another universe, aka back at home, Hagar is struggling. Her brain is slipping, and she ends up dying at the end. Spoiler alert. No one goes to her funeral because she was a mad woman, not special enough for the town. They all thought that she was not worthwhile. And I just want to talk about her name real quick. Hagar is the character from the Old Testament who
Mm-hmm.
was kicked out of her home because she was not the chosen wife of Abraham. And she ends up giving birth to Ishmael in the wilderness. She calls God the God who sees. And she refers to him and she knows that God has made a promise to her that she'll be like the mother of nations. And even though she's been kicked out and her son is going to die because they're starving and all that, miracles happen. She finds water, which is where modern day Mecca is. And her son ends up becoming the father of Islam, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Hagar is a very misunderstood character because it is her line that brings in Islam versus the line of Abraham, which brings in Judaism and
Mm-hmm.
modern day Christianity. And it's really interesting to me because Hagar is a hero for so many people and also kind of a villain for another group of people, depending on how you interpret the history.
Mm-hmm.
And this is fascinating because the whole vibe is the God who sees. That's how she refers to God. Pilate is someone who sees beyond. She's kind of like Clara in House of Spirits. There's a clairvoyance, there's just an awareness, there's a spirituality that Pilate holds, a wisdom, even though she's a little crazy. And they're also making wine. Like they're also bootlegging like crazy. That's their whole business. but she sees beyond the morals and the ethos and the statutes of modern day society. And Hagar, when she dies, Pilate interrupts her daughter's funeral and she's devastated. And she cries very loudly the words, "And she was loved."
Mm-hmm.
When we remember Hagar, we have to remember that she was deeply loved, even if it was just by Pilate.
Yeah.
And that to me is like one of the most moving moments. I want a poster that says, "And she was loved." So no
Yeah.
matter what Hagar's crimes were or her perceived worthlessness to this society, she was so deeply loved by Pilate.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah. It's an just like the women in this book are so incredible.
yeah,
Yeah. Why do you think Toni Morrison wrote this from Macon's perspective rather than from one of these other women that are,
oh, that is such a good question.
yeah.
Well, the books that she'd written before, right? Were
Mm-hmm.
they? Let me look this up. But I believe um, that
They were both from women because it
they were
was.
both from the perspective. Her first novel is The Bluest Eye,
Mm-hmm.
which is the perspective of a woman. And then what was the
Was
second book that
was
she wrote?
Beloved next?
No, Beloved was written like 10 years later.
Oh,
I know. Okay, the next one was Sula, which is also
okay.
the perspective of women. I just read that, and that was fascinating.
I have not read that yet.
Um, so I think it's different. I also think that we see Macon evolve though in a way where he is the essence of entitled toxic masculinity from the beginning, and he starts to see his mother with nuance, starts to see his father with nuance, and by the end of it, he starts to see himself with nuance, like
Mm.
because he also has to deal with class issues, like this whole odyssey that he goes on. Um, he's beaten up, he's treated poorly, he uses the tools of toxic masculinity and threatening rape to these men. Like there's like some stuff that I was like, ooh, that is rough to hear.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, he's interacting with these women, using them as well. Um, but when he hears about Hagar's death, there is a softness in him
Mm-hmm.
that is unique to how he was at the beginning. I think that we do see his evolution. And I think if we use Macon as the story of the hardness and trauma of racism in America, we see that it's not solved, but this journey of learning about self, learning the truth about self, ends with Milkman being a much more whole person. And I think we needed a character that was kind of unsympathetic at the beginning
Hmm.
to be able to see that evolution.
Yeah. Yeah. It is very Odyssean, if that's the word. There's even a
Odyssean. Yeah.
character named Circe who
Yes.
delivered Pilate and Macon's dad, who kind of helps. I feel like that it was a turning point. Him going on this journey to discover who he was, meeting this midwife who knew
Mm-hmm.
his family, And that's when it kind of starts. He starts discovering where he comes from, and his great grandfather
Yeah.
Solomon achieved um, achieved escaping slavery by flying away. Um,
Yeah.
and I think like going back to Macon starting off using toxic masculinity, and then him ending by breaking a cycle of Solomon. Like he didn't consciously choose to leave the women in his life where Solomon did. Like
Yeah.
left the women and his children to fend for themselves, so that he could find freedom. But I feel like with Macon, am I remembering this correctly?
Yeah, you are.
Yeah, just him deciding to stay with his family and make things better.
Yeah. Rebuild. Yeah, there was an element of magical realism with the flying bits.
Mm-hmm.
The flying, and even Circe, he meets Circe. She's living on like the estate that's dilapidated, and there's like tons of scary dogs. Um, and I couldn't tell. The whole time I was like, is this real, or is Macon having like, is Milkman having a vision, or like, is this a ghost, or is Circe in the flesh? Because she's got to be
Mm.
very old.
Very old. Yeah.
Yeah, like there were a lot of questions about that were really interesting to me. But I think it was, yeah, I think it was real.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole town is related to him because they're all descendants of Solomon,
Mm-hmm.
which was also really fascinating. It was very magical and bizarre.
Yeah.
And then they also use this theme of suicide as kind of flying.
Yeah.
They're jumping off of a building and flying.
Mm-hmm.
And they all just want to fly.
Yeah. I was reading about it, and like there's a Black American myth that depicts magical enslaved people escaping the horrors of slavery by flying home to Africa, weaving the traditional slave folk tale with a narrative set during the American Civil Rights Movement. Yeah, so there is a bit of that, and I think it was Macon mentioned that Pilot could fly without lifting her feet off the ground,
Yeah.
and just like being able to find freedom without needing to actually escape.
Yes.
Which is really quite beautiful of of just being liberated in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Where else was I going with that?
No, finding it's that Bob Marley thing. You have to free your mind before you free yourself or something. What's his
Mm-hmm.
quote? It's very famous. It's like in every history classroom of high schools.
Yeah, and it reminds me of the a character in Beloved too.
Mm-hmm.
Of just like her criticizing the community for not of kind of like, well, no, maybe Beloved is the wrong parallel. I think I'm thinking of Guitar.
Yeah.
Of just yeah, I'm thinking of Guitar because he wants to murder white people and like really hate
Oh,
white
should we
people.
get into Guitar real quick and just
Yeah.
explain his thing? So, Guitar and a few other notable characters in the book are members of this like vigilante secret group called the Days, right?
Yeah.
And every time a, a white person or a white group like the KKK, white supremacy motivated killing happens of Black people, they have to they believe that they're rebalancing society by going and killing white people in the same way.
Mm-hmm.
So one horrific one that we were kind of anticipating was that when that murder of the three beautiful girls in Birmingham
Mm-hmm.
happened at the church, Guitar has to figure out how he's going to do the same for
Mm-hmm.
three white girls. So it's like very horrific, but there's this, and it really brings it home of like, he doesn't want to kill them. He's not inspired by like doing this thing, but it's part of the order of creating balance
Mm-hmm.
in the universe. Call themselves the days because each person who's in this little order has a day of the week. So the Monday man, the Tuesday man, the Wednesday man.
Mm-hmm.
And depending on which crime occurred, what day that crime occurred, it's that
person's in
person's job.
charge. Yeah.
Yeah. And Milkman learns about this, and he has a choice whether to lean into this kind of this sense of justice or find a different sense as well. So he's constantly battling that issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very interesting, and it's very biblical too, like an eye for an eye.
Yes.
Um, but yeah, going back to like freeing your mind and Pilot, having found that peace, like guitar very much is holding on to this rage.
Mm-hmm.
And even though like Toni Morrison is like, it makes sense why you're angry.
Yeah.
But like the murder, yeah, bad.
Yeah.
Murder bad. And it doesn't really help the community at all. Like, I think like going back to Pilot and her crying and she was loved, like the things that will heal us is in like a really hippie sense, but like very true, is like loving each other and
Yeah.
taking care of each other, being there for each other.
Yeah. Well, and if you love someone, you see the dignity and the humanity in them.
Mm-hmm.
They cannot be objectified if you truly love someone.
Yeah.
Lust is objectification, but
Mm-hmm.
love requires humanity. And it's very hard to kill people or to destroy them if you see their humanity.
Yeah.
Yeah, the book is packed. Like we can't even, I think we've like barely scratched the surface.
Yeah.
Barely. But there's so much there.
Mm-hmm.
Because we didn't even talk about Milkman's mom.
No.
Or about Magdalene called Lena,
Mm-hmm.
which is one of his sisters, and First Corinthians, his other sister. We like didn't even scratch the surface of like the car that his dad drove and that
right.
whole situation,
Mm-hmm.
and even his dad.
Yeah. This is, yeah.
And the characters, all the older men that are kind of like watching Milkman move, that hang out at the bar and stuff and are like, what you doing?
Yeah. Amazing. Toni Morrison, like hit after hit.
Beatles, am I right?
Yeah.
I know, hit after hit. She was probably like, this is going to be a commercial success. I'm sure she sat down every time and was like, I'm going to write a book for everybody and they're going to love it. And it's going to be easy to read, fun, quick, kind
It'll
of Emily Henry. Yeah.
Slumps.
Beach
it's
reads.
Gonna be better than Hemingway.
Yeah. Yeah. And she goes down and like writes like the most complex like epic tales and hits on everything about humanity, and
they're not very big books either.
No, it doesn't make any sense to me. Like I cannot I don't understand how she does so much character development and gives us so much and also feeds my soul. Like it feels like scripture. It feels like how scripture should be, where you feel like she and Maya Angelou, both of their work, reading it when I'm really anxious or depressed, it is, they're both very much like balms to me. Mm-hmm. Even though those, like both of their work, no matter what you're picking up, is heavy and complex and painful. There's like, and maybe it goes back to how it's written. Mm-hmm. The prose is so beautiful that it feels good.
Yeah. There's like peace. Like either there are the tough parts, but then there's like peace found throughout the whole book. And you just end the book just like enlightened, uplifted.
More resilient somehow.
More resilient, yeah.
It strengthens that muscle. And there's something spiritual about it. I mean, I think that's why art is important. We don't have to understand it, but if it makes you feel like you can move forward, you feel more understood. I, as a white woman, somehow feel more understood.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know how she can make it so universal, telling such specific stories with such a specific history.
It is so beautiful.
And it's not written for us, too. And I think that's important to
yeah.
know. It is written for the African American experience. And it is written to be a balm and salve for them. But as good art does, it unifies and, creates bridges.
Yeah, a rising tide lifts all ships kind of thing.
Okay, Eden, we should end on that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and with that, goodbye. Yeah, that was, what a way to end this season.
Seriously.
Truly.
So good.
So good. So yeah, next time we'll release our next batch of books.
Which I still need to pick. I'm so sorry.
You're okay.
Nicole.
And then we'll take it from there.
Yeah. Also, it's banned because it deals with race.
I'm guessing. Yeah, we forgot that.
Yeah, but like, do we really need to? It deals with race, sex, alcohol, swearing, misogyny, but mostly it deals with race.
Yeah.
It establishes that America is built on racism, which is true. Yeah.
All right, let's look up why it was banned. Okay.
It is so funny that like the sisters are named Magdalene, called Lena. Is what her
First
name.
Corinthians.
And then First Corinthians.
Yeah.
I love it so much. What a delight.
Okay. Generative AI is experimental, but this is what AI has to say. Okay. Due to concerns about its content, including profanity, sexual references, and violence.
Right.
These challenges often stem from parents and community members who object to the book's depiction of sensitive themes, including racism and incest. Oh yeah, I guess him and Hagar. Let's see. Yeah, so quite a lot in the 1990s.
Yeah, I'm sure.
2014 in Texas. 2010 in Indiana. But it was removed from an AP English class, but later reinstated with parental consent.
Yeah.
Which I'm glad about.
Yeah.
And yeah,
I think that's
typically
fine too.
like,
why not have parental consent about books? Like, we're not asking for parents to not be involved in any way.
Yeah. And again, like going back to, typically books of this caliber are taught in AP classes. And so like to have a guide there, the English teacher who is trained in literature and like talking through this, like they're going to be able to talk about this book in a way that makes it relatable to kids and it's a safe environment. So yeah, there you go. Sorry.
So amen. Thank you.
There you go.
Wonderful.
Yeah. That concludes season 3. So thank you for listening.
Yay.
And we'll catch you next time.
Oh. I really thought I could read your mind.
Yes. Burn This Book was produced by us, Eden and Nicole.
Music written by me, Nicole, and produced and performed by my dad, Frank.